Welcome, where business buying banter meets no BS reality. Get ready to dive into the world of buying and selling businesses without the fluff and fancy jargon. Whether you're a seasoned business buying pro or a curious aspiring entrepreneur, this is where the real talk happens. Because in business, there's no room for sugarcoating. Let's get down to the brass tacks.
Oh, there she is. How are you?
Richard Parker, the Richard Parker. Might I add, ladies and gentlemen, the one that created a how to buy a business course over 20 years ago, not just last week, and repurposed it.
Oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, the course has changed dramatically over the years, of course, but on April 23rd, so we're today the 11th. Wow. So in 12 days, April 23rd, it's going to be 23 years.
23 years.
For that the
Everyone,
course. Yeah,
take that in.
Crazy.
That is who you want to get your buy a business advice from. Please.
And when I think about it, at the beginning, I used to go to Kinko's to print them and ship them out.
I bet
And it's like, compared to what it was, it was a big binder with some resources, but now, it's gotten so robust and so comprehensive, and we've had such great stories and, case studies from people over the years that have been incorporated into the material. So, what it was then versus what it is now is, it's not completely different, but it's dramatically changed and improved, but it's hard to believe. Like I remember sitting here the first day we put it up online. When we went online, it was like the internet, plenty of people weren't even connected.
I bet your bound courses that you got at Kinko's. Did it have a shiny plastic cover and
Yeah. And it weighed 9 pounds. And so I had to ship, when I used to ship it out, it was just crazy. It was to print them at Kinko's, and then they used to 3-hole punch them and put the tabs in. And, the binder was a big, 3-inch binder, and just crazy.
There's
and then everybody went to, I know for me anyways, I like paper, and then when we introduced the download version, we always kept the print version. And up until probably a couple of years ago, and then it was just overwhelming. The amount of digital at one point, I think it was like 98% of the orders were for the digital version. People wanted it immediately. They wanted to sort their documents. You can, make some annotations on it, some of the PDFs in Excel and what have you. But yes, here it is. I was just thinking before the show, my God, the weeks go fast. And now I'm reflecting on 23 years. Boosh, gone.
23 years. Yeah. And what's funny is, as we're talking here, because every time we meet on Thursdays and we talk about different topics, how to buy a business, my smartphone always picks up what we're talking about. And I'll visit Facebook just to see what family is doing. I'm not real active on Facebook. And the ads that come through to me about how to buy a business course.
Right.
Unbelievable. So, and a few of them, some will offer free as a lead magnet and then capture you to pay for their course. And it's kind of sad when you buy some courses and they call the SBA something other than what it stands for, Small Business Administration. Yep. They'll tell you something different that the acronym stands for. Yeah. If that's happening and that's your course teacher, ladies and gentlemen, you better think again whose course you're buying.
Yeah. I spoke with someone yesterday who, has been following our material for a little while, and he bought a couple of those courses. And I remember when I went into the business, I remember I had bought a course online about buying real estate. It was a guy, Carlton Sheets. He was the original infomercial guy. Carlton Sheets teaches you how to buy real estate for, reasonably, for good, good terms, not no money down type of stuff, but good leverage and whatever. And his material was so effective. And then a couple of years later, and this is years ago, I had bought some material and online. And when I got it, I wanted to vomit. It was so disappointing. I started thinking about, my God, like the promises made on that website compared to what they actually sold or sent me was just frightening. And so when I developed the courses, no way I'm ever going to do that, number one. And number two, I remember I paid probably $150 way back when, and there's no refund. And I said, one of the things when I come on my course, I'm going to let anybody get a refund anytime they want. I have a lifetime guarantee because I that feeling of paying for something, putting your trust in someone, believing what you read on their website, then you get this material and it like doesn't meet your expectations. And I never want anyone to feel that way. It was so aggravating for me.
I'd like to toss in the fact that your course is so reasonably priced that it's night and day compared to the value with what you deliver compared to the others, what they deliver and the price they're charging.
Crazy. Yeah, it's obscene what they charge. Obscene. Yeah, and it's heartbreaking when you see people spend thousands. First of all, I appreciate it. Thank you. But
Yeah.
it's obscene like you see people spending thousands and thousands of dollars. It's just like,
Mhm.
are you kidding me? And
The
when
best,
people are at their most vulnerable in a sense, like
yes,
they have hopes and dreams and want to get into entrepreneurship, and then someone taking advantage of that is just, I mean, it's just so unscrupulous.
that's exactly my thoughts, Richard. And what I like too is your course offers anytime they want to talk to you, you're willing to set up a call. I mean,
Yeah,
come on.
I do that all day.
Thank you. That's now I have purchased courses, different ones in the past for certain things online, and they're expensive and there is no one-on-one pick up the phone and talk to Richard kind of a course teacher. So people really connect with Richard. Where can they go for that course?
Go to richardparker.com.
Okay. I know you didn't expect me to do this, but
No, I appreciate it, and it's one of the things that, when you and I, when we started, planning to do these shows, we recognized that, the hand holding aspect
Mhm.
is so important for people, being able to provide people with good information, accurate information, and information that they could put to use immediately.
Yeah.
When you and I went back and forth and how, what we want this, live stream to look like and the information we want to disseminate and, providing people with real world experience, but most importantly, a real hand holding experience, because
Yeah.
it's one thing to get information wherever the source is, assuming it's good information, but
Yeah.
things happen in the real world that are different, or situations you can't account for every possible scenario. And so,
Mm.
providing the hand holding experience like you do when you do your SBA work for an individual and you work as their advisor. I mean, you're holding their hand through the whole process, and that's really important for people because most of them are way over their head, right?
Oh, yeah.
They just don't know what they're doing. It's understandable. They haven't done it before.
Heck, I know SBA lenders that are over their head. You know,
Right.
similar to baby boomers selling small businesses, the SBA industry has baby boomer front end SBA lenders and Gen Xers, and we've all been doing this a long time, and we're leaving. We're exiting. We're retiring from that, which means the new group is coming. But as you know, Richard, it takes years. I mean, how many years for you before you built your course that you felt confident what you were delivering? The same is applicable for SBA lenders, right?
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, and you never stop learning
Never.
because every deal I tell people, I'm in the M&A world, which is always the fancy word for buying and selling businesses, but in the world of M&A for 34 years, and I still learn something in every deal.
Yeah.
Without question, there's always something new. And being you're able, when something new comes up, very often you're able to take prior events or prior deals and come up with a scenario or a solution to them. But oftentimes it's just brand new and you have to start learning again and digging again and finding information and ways to solve it. I mean, that to me, that's one of the most fascinating parts of what we do, because keeps there's never a dull moment, right?
It creates another story for your course to toss in,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Dinner table stories and course stories. Exactly.
Oh, curveball stories are the best. We learn from curveballs, and
We learn from
and
curveballs.
you often say that, expect it. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the smoothest deals always have, something thrown in that causes people to pivot or flip out or whatever the case may be. But their smooth sailing is really, when you look back on it, okay, there's some hiccups, but there's always something that comes in that it's
Mhm.
what you don't expect that comes back to bite you in the dupa.
In the dupa. And isn't that the true meaning of entrepreneurship?
Yep.
So if you're going to buy a business, expect the curveballs, and after you fund, there'll be more coming. It's just part of the journey. So
It's
enjoy
part of
it.
the journey, and true entrepreneurs welcome it. right?
You
You
know,
have to embrace, to me, it's you have to embrace the uncertainty. You have to embrace the changes. You have to embrace the setbacks. That's entrepreneurship. If
yeah.
and some are cut out for it and some aren't.
But you know what's beautiful about it is you're in control. You're no longer at the mercy of your corporate supervisor.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Bye bye, boss.
That's right. Bye bye, boss. Buy a business. Let's get into our topic today for our loyal listeners. We're going to talk about the relationship with the seller, top questions to ask. But I know this is a chapter in your course, if I believe, right?
Yep, it's a
Um,
big one. Yep.
yeah. So I'm going to let you take the lead on today's topic. I have a few top questions that I think of in the lending space, but I want you to share with our listeners, Richard, the importance of building up that relationship with the seller, and in some cases, if the listing broker is there as well. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes these are behind the scenes deals. So there's two different scenarios we have to kind of work if we are business buyers searching private and public listings.
Great. So you hit the nail right on the head, because as a matter of fact, next week I'm doing a webinar on this subject matter as well, and it's really divided into publicly listed businesses for sale and private off-market deals, because the approach is completely different. The preparation is the same, but the approach is different, and where some of these intersect, and as you pointed out, where I see buyers make a big mistake is when they get to meet with the seller and they start with their questions, they jump right in like a jackhammer. And it's almost like these gotcha questions. And the way to get deals done, by and large, I mean, you have the odd exception, is you have to establish a really meaningful relationship with the seller, a trusting relationship. You're building up credibility each time. It's like the ultimate, at the beginning, it's like the ultimate first date. You're going on a first date. I mean, you're not signing a lease together. You're getting to know each other. You're not buying furniture together. You're getting to know each other. And so having this approach of having these very meaningful conversations, transparent conversations with the seller,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can get to know each other. Because if you can establish that relationship, then not only does it make the whole process more enjoyable, but allows you to solve issues along the way
Mm-hmm.
between the two parties, as opposed to attorneys, accountants, brokers, hovering and pushing the deals in different directions. And all those professionals have their place, but deals get done between buyers and sellers. So I tell people, you go into these conversations, you have to just talk to each other. You don't want to be sitting there and saying, well, I've got these 42 questions. And, of course, we outlined 36 questions that you must get answered, but you don't have to answer them immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The approach of, establishing trust, getting to know each other, getting enough information to continue. But as you said, getting that relationship off to a good start is crucial.
Right. I look at it similar to applying for a big corporate career job. You're going to be buying this business. You want to be the new CEO. So when you go into that corporate interview, you're building a relationship. You're not attacking them on everything that's wrong with that job right out of the gates.
Yeah, and you have to be sensitive to the fact
Mhm.
that, sellers start off with a lot more emotion in this process than the
Mm,
buyer. A buyer approaches this logically. I want to buy a good business. I want to make sure I pay the right price. I want to make sure I solve for any problems and, structure a deal that makes sense. And those are all logical ways of approaching it. And a seller approaches it like, okay, I'm selling my business. I'm facing retirement. I've got my legacy to worry about. I've got my employees to worry about. Is the deal going to make sense financially? They're all emotional issues. And so being empathetic to the opposite side of the table is so important, because people don't realize sellers get remorse as frequently as buyers do,
mhm. Sure.
because they're letting go a part of their life. A lot of them haven't even properly planned for what comes next. And
Mhm.
it's all of a sudden they wake up one day and say, oh my God, like I don't even have a place to go tomorrow.
Mhm.
So with that type of mindset. So understanding how the seller is approaching this is
Mhm.
so important, and that the empathy that a buyer. Now that doesn't mean you cave in on things.
Yeah.
These are completely separate and apart. there's the deal terms or whatever, but it's the philosophical approach to having that relationship with the seller and understanding that this is big for them too. Yes, a buyer assumes infinitely more risk in the deal, but
Mhm.
this is like, for some sellers, this is like this biggest decision they'll also make in their life, and it's not only frightening to them, there's just a lot to think about. It's a life-changing moment for them as well.
So the seller is meeting with the buyer for the first time. I'm sure he's thinking in his head, is Richard going to be a fit to take care of this legacy of mine, my clients? He's thinking, is Richard going to be the right personality? I don't even think we're talking about numbers at this point. What are some conversation starters that you would recommend to searchers and buyers that are having this initial conversation with the seller? What are some good conversation starters? Give us
Well,
your
one
maybe top 2, 3.
Well, one thing that's very important, buyers, when you get to the point you just start getting the questions going back and forth, and you're sitting across the table from the seller, and you have all your questions laid out, the buyer must ask their questions first. And the reason being is, if they allow the seller to start asking their, because they're going to have questions for you too, and they
Mhm.
start going into the details, for example, where, tell me a little bit about yourself, Mr. Buyer, and you start giving this whole long history of what you've done and what you're good at. And, I've been in the commercial cleaning business for related years, for so many years. My strengths are definitely sales and organization and being able to put a project together and being able to deal with people and numbers, whatever. When you lay out too much of your strengths to the seller first, and
Mhm.
then you ask them, who is the ideal client to buy this business, they're going to say to you, well, it's someone who has a lot of strengths in operations and putting a team together. And they're going to almost mirror what you told them, because no matter what, they want to sell you the business. So
Mhm.
you don't want to tip your cards too early, or play your cards too early, show your
Okay.
cards to the extent of letting on information that you provide that they're going to use in answering your questions. So the key is, you want to ask your questions first. Now,
Okay.
there's a couple of very high level questions. One of the things but at the same time, you want to impress them, because very often there's multiple buyers looking at a deal. And so you want them to feel very confident that you are the person. So if you generate and you demonstrate empathy and how important it is. And one thing that's very important that you're going to be asked is, are you planning any changes? That's a question that a seller is going to ask you, and the employees are going to ask you the first day you take over.
Mm.
And the answer is no,
Thank
categorically, no, zero, nada. And we say in French, rien, in Yiddish, gornish, nothing. Okay. Like, I'm not changing anything, because that's what starts to get people flipping out about things.
It's
So,
exactly what the
so
bank underwriter wants to hear too, because they're
absolutely.
gonna ask that same question,
Yeah, same
everyone.
question. So from a buyer's perspective, some of the questions that I really uh, impress upon people to drill down to, number one is, what do you do every day, Mr. or Mrs. Seller?
Mhm.
Like, what does your day consist of? What are you focused on? What are your tasks? How do you drive the business? Because what you have to get to is a point where you understand, as a buyer, am I the right person for this business? So,
Yeah.
and typically, seller leaves, you take their place. So, what is it that you do every day?
Mhm.
Okay, in your task, how do you drive the business? The other thing that I want buyers to pay attention to when they meet the seller is, what does the meeting look like? Because you can tell a lot. That's why it's so important they meet at the seller's location. And are they answering their phone throughout the meeting? Are employees interrupting them all day
Mm.
throughout the meeting? Are they able, because if not, because it might mean they're micromanaging or they don't have good employees. One of the other questions that I find very important to ask the seller, and sellers often get taken aback, and we're going to cover it in great detail during our webinar next week, but is, how much vacation do you take? And
Mhm.
very often they look at you as like, what are you talking about? You haven't bought the business yet. You're already looking to take time off. And it's not that at all. It's, you want to understand, have they been able to put process, procedures, systems, and people in place that allow the business for them to operate, and for the owner to take time away from the business? Because the goal of being in business is to provide yourself with some more freedom through finance,
Mhm.
for generating more money, give you more freedom. But do they have the right people in place and right systems? And so, a question that they don't expect is, how much vacation that you take. So
Great
I love,
question.
yeah, and it puts people off, but it's very telling. And so, to me, at the top is, what do you do every day, and drill down to that to get very
Mhm.
explicit. If they say a bit of everything, well, what do you do most of? And then, how much vacation you take? Those are always, to me, two great questions that could start cutting to the heart of the matter.
I'd like to add to that great question, Richard. How much vacation do you take? That is a great due diligence question to ask, especially when you are visiting with the business listing that was marketed as absentee owned.
Right.
Today, we are seeing it seems to me most businesses are marketed as absentee owned. And I have learned a few the hard way over the years. The buyers transitioned in, it was far from absentee owned.
Far from it, far from absentee. And so understanding, that, who's second in command.
Yeah.
In my experience, it is very rare at the lower market to find a successful absentee run businesses. These are owner operators. You got to roll up your sleeves. It takes blood, sweat, and tears, and get your fingernails dirty and get completely immersed and learn that business. And then you can strive to put a second level tier of management into place or improve some of the people in the systems, what have you. But this concept, not only does the concept not make sense and not work in the real world, why would you even want to go down that road? And so that's why it really goes back to the first point we were talking about, which is what is it that you do every day? And really getting an understanding of that. And the double click to that are the people that are involved.
Yeah.
And, I would caution people that anytime they see an absentee run business, first of all, it's going to be rare at the lower end of the market because they don't have enough staff in place to do it. Yeah, if you're talking about a tiny little business with 2 employees doing a couple $100,000 a year, that's entirely different than a business doing $1 million, $2 million, $5 million in revenue, where it's not the case. And they very often embellish the amount that the owners work. That's why having this trusting and transparent relationship with the seller is going to let what happens when you do that, the seller's guard is going to drop.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to let their guard down. And it's not like you're trying to get these gotcha questions, but they're going to lead on what the reality is of the business when you have that good relationship. But to the point of absentee run business, people got to be really careful because it's just not that common. They may make the claim, but it's just not reality.
There are a lot of influencers out there making the claim that you can buy boring businesses and they are absentee owned. One key employee that's running the show, if that key employee doesn't like you as the new owner and they're gone 30 days post loan closing, not so boring anymore.
Well, no, it's not so boring. It's a little bit of heartache. And so it's, it really something to be very, very cautious about. And that's why digging through this process is not a one meeting event. It's not a 2 meeting event. It's you have these calls and these in-face meetings with sellers. And I strongly believe and urge any prospective business buyers, the faster you get to face-to-face meetings, even to the first meeting, you want to meet face-to-face with the sellers. You want to see the business in action. It's very easy to make claims about the business, but you want to look at the business in action to see, is what's going on day to day in the business actually what was in the write-up?
That's right.
Based on the number of people and the activity and what have you. And so, it rarely reflects reality. So having that good back and forth with the seller and establishing a good relationship is so fun, is so critical.
So tell me this, Richard, on the lender side, when we write up a credit memo to present to the underwriter a business acquisition loan project, I always was trained to get the crap at the top and tell them what the pain points are. Okay.
Yes.
So if you're a buyer, when is the right time to ask a seller, what are the biggest challenges in your business right now? Because we need to know that. We all have challenges. And, we talked about that at top of the show, challenges, curveballs. We thrive on those as entrepreneurs. But these broker listing summaries, they're not listing what the challenges are. It's all fluff and pretty, and it's the best slice of bread in the loaf. Wouldn't it be shocking to actually see some honesty in a summary that says, these are the challenges right here, right now? But we don't do that. But we need to know what that is as a buyer. When's the best time to have that conversation?
Yesterday.
There you go.
Now, getting in, and one of the questions, is, what keeps you up at night about the business, because there's always something. There's ways to research what are typically common problems within an industry. You can, when you do your proper research, you can determine pretty consistently what are problems in business types from business to business. Now, when you may not, when you get the information from the broker or the seller, and you're right, oftentimes it's a lot of fluff. I know when I write up my decks, when I represent sellers, I have an entire section devoted to buyer concerns. If I'm a buyer, here's what I would be concerned about the business, and being completely upfront. These are the concerns, because if you can't live with them, it's not for you. But getting to those issues very quickly, and oftentimes a seller won't disclose what they are. For example, a seller may not think that customer concentration is a problem, but you as the buyer, you're looking at that and say, hey, 30% of their business is coming from one customer. You have to address that immediately.
That's right.
In multiple ways. Same with any other things that you're concerned about. If there's property that's involved, not with the sale of the business, but they're leasing, or they're a retail location and they rely on an anchor tenant down the road, and you find out, that, you want to know how long that lease is, or they say, well, that so-and-so's moving out. It's not a problem. We got our customers coming in anyways. No, that's a problem, because understand one thing. When you ask the question to the seller, what are the challenges in your business? What keeps you up at night about the business? What are the problems in the business? If you can go back and change anything, what would you do differently? If money was no object and you can put it into the business, what would you address? All these type of things, or any problems in the business, even though a seller may look at them as incidents and minor problems, in the eyes of a buyer, they're magnified to the power of 10. At least, because the buyer has no knowledge about the business. And so getting to those early, because if they're too big for you as the buyer to deal with, why continue the conversation? Move on to the next one, and fast.
I'm so glad you mentioned the story about the anchor tenant, that an anchor tenant that brings in a ton of traffic to a strip mall, and you're the small business in that strip mall, that anchor tenant leaves, we got issues. I'm thinking of an acquisition from a few years ago where the seller was selling, and he knew there was going to be some major road construction the following summer. He did share that information. He did disclose that, where the main drag highway in front of the business, the strip mall, was going to be shut down for like the whole season, which was going to negatively impact who the buyer was. So in this case, the seller did disclose it, but do all is the question.
No, they don't all. And, one of the points you brought up, typically anything that if you rely on destination, especially if you're in your commercial area or strip plaza or that type of thing, industrial park, that type of area that relies on local traffic coming by, one thing to keep in mind, road repair generally happens every 10 years. And so if you're looking at a business that relies on location, you've got to go to the city hall and find out when the last major road work was done, because you can count on happening it on average every 10 years. Similarly, I was in a situation where I was looking at a business. They had multiple locations. Their best location was part of a strip plaza. And when I was going in and asking the questions, I was talking to the seller, and I was talking to, and some of the employees were there. They were aware of the sale, whatever. And there was a huge grocery anchor tenant that drove all the traffic to this particular mall. And I mentioned something in passing along those lines about that tenant, and one of the employees blurted out, "Oh, those poor people." I said, "What do you mean?" And the seller just looked at them like eyes that would kill. And the person shut up right away. And then I realized, okay, something's going on here. And I found out they were scheduled to be moving. And they had already found their other location. They were just keeping it open for another 6 months. And seller had no intention of disclosing that. There were, yes, multiple locations, but this was the best performing one of all of them. And it was just by accident, just by asking questions, getting good questions. Oh, those poor people.
That's a great segue to who's the dupa in that
Who's
situation?
the dupa? Yes.
I think it's time to bring who's the dupa, but man, that was a true who's the dupa story. But I'm glad somebody stood up and was honest.
Yes. Yeah. Most people are. Not all, but most are.
All right. Well, let's do our who's the dupa. We're at the half-hour mark. So here we go. Ready for... we can plan that. Yeah, that was perfect. I was thinking that's a great story of who's the dupa, but I have a different story for you, Richard, and for our listeners. All right. So for our listeners that are new, we bring a who's the dupa segue into our 45-minute show at the half-hour mark, and we talk about a quick little story, and we try to figure out who's the dupa in this situation. So, a nearby strip club earning tons of cash has gone up for sale, Richard.
I like where this is going. Okay.
Like a funeral home, this is one of those businesses that people prefer not to do, but will do because the industry always has demand. Funeral home to a strip club, Richard. There's a lot of demand in these industries. Did you
Yes.
know that?
Makes perfect sense to me.
All right. So the business sale comes with the real estate, including 8 apartments attached to the building, a liquor license, a gaming license for slots, and a tobacco license that transfers with the business. This fella is considering buying it. However, his friend, a dancer traveling the country for over 6 years, who earned an MBA, the unconventional kind, he says, known as Master in Booty Administration, tells me to run from what I'm thinking to do. She tells me the girls do whatever they want and I'd never be able to manage them. She states that the liability I would take on when some of them do their extras, including selling drugs, is not a place I want to be as the new business owner transitioning in. I think I could turn this around and improve operations and halt the extracurricular activities. Should I listen to my MBA experienced friend? Who's the dupa, Richard?
The buyer. Of course you listen to your MBA friend. This is, this your MBA friend is a believable party. You
Mhm.
as the buyer know nothing. And you always want to strive to get information from, what I like to term. Well, I stole the term, if you will, from my work when I did my work for many years with the Dalio family office, because it was a very popular term that Ray used and became pervasive amongst the group, which is, if you have a situation, you go to the most believable party on that subject matter,
Uh-huh.
okay, to get the answers. Because at the beginning, you know nothing. You're just a dummy. And we're all dummies, right? We're embarking upon a new project. So who's the believable party in this situation? She's worked there. She knows the mentality of of the people who work there. She knows what goes on in the background. She knows the shenanigans about the drug dealing and the extracurricular activities. And so if this individual who knows nothing
Mm-hmm.
is not prepared to take information from someone who knows infinitely more than he does about the workings of this business and that MBA, and she's telling him, do not do this,
Right.
right? I mean, then he has to have his head examined to go ahead with it. Now, it's possible there are people in the industry that know more than her, of course, but at this stage, she's the believable party.
That's right.
So if you want to just buck that trend and go do something on your own, you're a dupa. You are clearly the dupa.
And don't go to SBA for approval. That will be declined. It's an ineligible industry.
Okay. Very
Funerals, though,
profitable.
can get John.
Funeral homes are okay, right?
Yeah, those are profitable. Yeah, but, it's funny that we're talking about this. She's a believable party. So for our searchers that are listening in, any other industry, would it be wise for them to contact an employee at another business that's a similar, industry to see what their thoughts are? What do you like about what's going on in this industry? What do you think about that?
I say go to the owners of other businesses. Never
Yeah.
disclose which business you're talking about, and you want to get out of the area geographically all if you can. But speak to the owners. Some of the challenges, because some of them may have gone through a buying process to acquire their business, and what are industry trends? What are some of the challenges that you see? How do you generate business? All these type of things. No one is better served than an owner of a similar business. Now, it won't be an exact business, but it'll give you a very good idea. And clearly, in those scenarios, those people, they are the believable parties. They're in the trenches. They
Yeah.
know. It's a great resource to uncover good information.
Love
Just
it.
the thing above everything else is ideally you want to move out of the area completely to find a seller in that industry, because you never ever want to disclose or even have it come out in any way, shape, or form about the business that you're currently in talks with. So you have to be super diligent and super respectful about the confidentiality. But yes, speaking to someone, an insider in the industry, fantastic recommendation, Deb.
I love that. So as we're nearing the end of the show, let's get back to, having those conversations with the seller for our people that are listening in that are potential future buyers. How many conversations would you recommend that they have? I mean, they start out with the one, when is enough is enough is enough.
Well, it's the answer to that is there they're typically unlimited because you
Mhm.
have to get all your questions answered. But sometimes it comes in stages, meaning there's certain answers that you need to get to the point of drafting an indication of interest or an LOI. A
Yep.
lot of them come in this stages of due diligence. And so you at the beginning, you get enough of your key questions answered to get you to the point that you feel comfortable or not
Yeah.
with making an offer or walking away. And understand, when you're new at looking at a business, every questions beget more questions. So it's like the more questions you ask, the more questions you have. But it's done in stages. You got to get to the point
Mhm.
of feeling comfortable that if you get to the point of feeling comfortable based on the questions that I've asked and the answers that I've received today, am I prepared to move forward with this deal given what I know at this point, with the understanding there's more questions to come, because the questions almost never end. And on that point, what buyers also need to understand is every business has problems, every business has warts. There's going to be some questions you're not going to get the answers that satisfy you. So you have to make the determination, can you live with those warts and pimples?
Mhm.
Because no business is perfect.
Have you seen sellers over your tenure, Richard, that said, I don't want to talk to this buyer anymore, I'm done?
Yep.
Maybe give us an example or two.
Yeah. Well, it's the one. I have one more question to death. They, there's no end to it, and
Yeah.
that's why having a good relationship, and also impressing the seller that you're the right person to buy the business, but you can't make them completely nuts. And
Yeah.
there's always going to be a small element of risk. You can solve for it for most of it, but you got to realize there's some incidents. You can't treat every incident like a catastrophe. You can't run to the seller like this is every time you find something, it's a massive problem. Choose your deal breakers and red flag items and red line items very, very carefully. Be very careful before you draw a line in the sand. And yes, I see that all the time. I had it once. This was a colleague of mine was telling me in the closing. They got to the point of the closing, and the buyer was driving the seller crazy throughout this process, like to no end. And it was a colleague of mine who's actually an intermediary, and I know he manages his deals very well. And he kept asking questions and questions and questions. It was like never satisfied. Driving,
Mhm.
and they finally got to the closing table. And at the closing table, um, the buyer said to the seller, when they started talking about some of the people, the buyer said, "You know what? I'm going to get rid of this, and this one right away." And the seller went, boom, smacked his hand on the table, said, "You know what? I'm not selling you the business. Get out."
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
at the closing table, said, "Sue me and do whatever you want." So everybody has their threshold.
That's right. And I want to add, similar pain points are front end SBA lenders. If they lack experience, not knowing what questions to ask before they package the deal and write up that credit memo and put the pain points at the top, like we talked about earlier. If they're not asking all the right questions out of the gates and it gets shipped to the underwriter, well, the underwriter is going to have a ton more questions, and now we got to go back to the seller, and it's a
Start
hot
again.
mess.
It's a hot
So
mess.
buyers, beware to make sure whoever you're working with, wherever your funding is coming from, are there questions being asked, and are they sufficient enough to compile a good credit memo that's not going to create all that pain and angst to keep going back to the seller? Oh, the underwriter's got 10 more questions. Well, sometimes that's at the fault of the front end SBA lender. A lot of them are coming up the trenches and they're brand new in this industry because a lot of us have left and retired. So be careful where you're going on your journey for SBA lending, because the same is applicable.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's to the point that we've talked about often, where you've got to surround yourself with the right group of advisors.
Mhm.
People that are looking to buy a business, for the most part, the vast majority of them have never bought one before.
Mhm.
And so when you go through this process, you've got to go through this. You've got to educate yourself, number one, and you've got to surround yourself with a good team. If you
Yeah.
think you're going to go into this process and just fly by the seat of your pants and make decisions that you have no preparation, knowledge, expertise, or experience to make along the way, either one or two things that are going to happen. You're going to buy the wrong business for you and you're going to drastically overpay for it, or you're not going to buy a business at all. And the stats in our industry demonstrate that
Yes.
94% of the people begin the search to buy a business, never complete a transaction. So
Mhm.
people have to just look at this in an intelligent way and say, this is a big, big project. I need to align myself with the best possible advisors
Yeah.
along the way. If I need SBA financing, they got to turn to someone like you. They have no understanding related to the buying business. I'm not trying to sound like an infomercial here for what
Yeah.
you and I do every day, but
Right.
deal with someone like yourself. Get the information from courses that we provided,
That's
and
right.
other information we provide. Make sure your attorney is a transaction attorney and
Yeah.
not your brother-in-law, the patent attorney. The accountant is well versed in doing due diligence for this type of business. So it's having the right people around you, which is very, very important.
Oh, you get me so jacked up when you just keep talking and bringing that out, because that 94% figure that searchers today never buy a business, I think a lot of that is due to inexperienced lenders. I really truly believe it. Or transactional lenders that, you know, the wrong people. You have to, like you said, you got to get the right people in front of you. Which is a great segue before we wrap up our show. You're hosting these business buying networking webinars and
Yes.
Q&As, and I have attended them. And the questions that brand new business buyers and searchers are asking are unbelievably good questions. And the whole group that's attending these webinars, they're getting free value. Can you please share with us when your next webinar is?
Well, I love having you because, as a matter of fact, the other week you were able to weigh in on one of the questions related to lenders. So the next one is on April 17th at 12 o'clock. And it goes for 2 hours. Next week, or actually, it's a add-on to this. We're talking about preparing for and meeting with the seller.
Mhm.
Last week, we talked about the 10 commandments of buying a business and valuing a business, and the webinar before that was on the right business and how to find it. And the prior webinars are actually all on YouTube. But if they want to register, they can go to richardparker.com. We actually have it right at the top of the homepage where there's a link to register through Zoom. And they've been unbelievable. Like, I have been slammed with emails after from people about how appreciative they are and information they got. It's a great session. We do a good educational piece for about an hour and 15 minutes, and then we open it up to Q&A. It's like this ask me anything session, and
Mhm.
it's really good learning for people. So if you, no matter where you are in the process of buying businesses, or buying a business, it's time well spent, because we'll be able to not only get your questions answered, but you hear questions from other people that are
Mhm.
very often applicable to your situation. So it's been great. I've had terrific feedback and looking forward to keep doing it. And as a matter of fact, just to go on for a second, someone raised a question about certain questions you should be asking related to online business. I would advise that individual join us next week and ask that question. But
There we go.
one of the top things at the top of the list related to an online business is you have to understand what is happening to the seller after the deal closes. Because in the world of online businesses, you can hide yourself anywhere on this planet and go back into business and compete with the business that you're purchasing. So you need to understand that there's got to be a way to tie up the seller in a very meaningful way,
Mhm.
because you can assume a whole different identity and open up a different website. And so you have to be very, very cautious related to what they're going to be doing afterwards, as well as the transfer of all the domains and the websites
Mhm.
and all of their marketing, but getting very, very clear on what are they doing after the transaction, and tying them up, really putting handcuffs on them. Because I've seen it time and time again where people buy an online business and find out a week later that the person who sold them the business is now back into business competing with them.
Oh gosh, yeah, and that's why I love working with you, because not every transaction can be approved by a bank or backed by the SBA because of certain parameters that the SBA SOP has in place. But you bring so much additional value to all the other ways to get funding to buy these businesses the right way. And that excites me. And I learn a lot on those
Well,
calls.
I'm glad you're excited, Deb. Perfect.
Yeah.
Aren't you glad I showed up?
Well,
Beautiful.
of course, it was meant to be that we
Oh,
our
I love
roads.
doing these. I love doing these shows with you. I
I do
love them.
too.
Yeah,
I
they're
do too.
great. I
And
just
look
can't
at
believe
that.
how fast the weeks go. And now, and 2:45.
I
How fast the
know.
show goes,
Well, this just flowed like a mojo.
like a mojo.
Well, I think that's a good wrap up for today's show. Let's just remind everyone, go to richardparker.com for the networking webinar for business buyers to learn April 17th, right, Richard?
Yeah, April 17th, 12 o'clock. And of course, debcurtis.com. You want to hook up with a SBA expert. That's the
Well,
one.
thank
And
you.
I'm assuming you get a lot of calls from people and you're able to have a good initial conversation with them to lay out, what they're looking at and how they should be going about it, and
Yeah.
the whole expanse of your services.
And some of them are in such an early stage that I refer them to go to your course and start working with you there, because it's reasonably priced. It's been around for 23 years. Happy anniversary, Richard. Open up that bottle of champagne. So,
Deal. I
all
don't need
right.
much incentive to got it. If I didn't have another
Okay,
meeting this afternoon, I might do it now.
that's right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Business Buying Banter. We're so happy that you joined us today. Richard and I will be back next week, Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Until then, support small businesses.
Bye, Deb.
Bye, Richard.